The scent hit me first. Iron and smoke and something deeper, more primal. The scent of a wolf who had forgotten what it meant to run with a pack, who had buried himself so deep in isolation that even his beast had gone quiet. I stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the forge glow like a dying star against the mountain darkness. 15 years I had spent tracking rumors of the ghost of Crimson Vale, the war alpha who had disappeared after his son's death, and now I had found him. Not leading armies, not commanding respect, but here, alone in the wilderness, beating metal into shapes that would never know battle. Gareth Ironpeak, the man whose name still made veteran soldiers stand straighter. The alpha whose tactical genius had turned the tide of a war we were losing. The father whose grief had been so profound that witnesses said he screamed for 3 hours when the pack bond tore and woke up hollow. I needed him, not wanted, needed, because in 6 months, every Lycan over 40 would lose their wolf permanently, and he was the only person in recorded history who had survived direct contact with an active Nexus stone. The only one who might understand the magical catastrophe unfolding across our territories. But standing here breathing in his scent, feeling my wolf respond in ways I had not felt since my husband died 15 years ago, I realized this mission had just become infinitely more complicated. My wolf recognized him, not as a stranger, not as a target, as something far more dangerous, as a potential mate. I forced the thought down, buried it beneath layers of professional distance and tactical focus. I was Astrid Frostborn, combat specialist and lead researcher for the Nexus Study Commission. I did not have time for the messy complications of attraction, especially not to a broken alpha who had spent 15 years running from everything that made him powerful. The hammer fell with rhythmic precision, each strike a meditation, a penance, a prayer to gods who did not answer. I watched the play of muscles across his back, visible through the thin shirt soaked with sweat and forge heat. 53 years old, and still built like a warrior in his prime, still moving with the controlled grace of a predator who had simply chosen to stop hunting. My scientific mind cataloged details automatically. Height approximately 6'2", weight around 215 pounds, most of it muscle earned through decades of training and maintained through physical labor. Hair dark, but threaded with silver, worn longer than military regulations would have allowed. Scars visible on his forearms, the kind that came from claws and teeth rather than blades. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch when he finally turned toward me. Gold, like all our kind when the wolf was close to the surface, but fractured somehow, as if looking at the world through broken glass. Eyes that had seen too much and survived only by learning not to see anything at all. "You are far from civilization, stranger." His voice was rough, unused to conversation. Deep and resonant in a way that made my wolf perk up with interest I absolutely could not afford to indulge. "Most people who find me wish they hadn't. I don't take students. I don't take causes. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." I stepped into the forge light, letting him see me clearly, watching his nostrils flare as he caught my scent, as his wolf recognized another predator, another survivor, another soul carrying weight too heavy for one person to bear. "I'm not selling anything," I said, keeping my voice level despite the way my pulse had kicked up. "I'm here to collect a debt." His expression shifted, something that might have been amusement crossing his features. "I don't owe anyone anything. Paid my debts when I resigned my commission." "Not that kind of debt." I pulled the leather folder from my coat, emblazoned with the Alpha Council seal. "Your son died trying to map a Nexus stone. The information he was gathering could have saved thousands. He never got to deliver it. But you experienced his death through the pack bond. You felt everything he felt when that stone detonated, which means you have information no one else possesses." I watched him carefully, cataloging the micro-expressions that flickered across his face. Pain. Guilt. And underneath it all, a spark of something that looked dangerously like hope, quickly strangled before it could fully form. "My son's death is not currency to be spent on council business." Each word was carefully controlled, but I heard the growl underneath. His wolf was closer to the surface than he wanted to admit, responding to the topic that had defined 15 years of self-imposed exile. "I know." I moved closer, into his personal space, watching his pupils dilate as proximity allowed our scents to truly mingle. "And I'm sorry to weaponize your grief, but 60,000 lives are at stake. The Nexus stones are destabilizing. In 6 months, every lichen over 40 loses their wolf permanently. We become mortal. We age like humans. We die. I pulled out the medical reports, the statistical analyses, the maps marked with red dots showing where lichens were already losing their connection. I've documented 43 cases in the past year. Elders waking to find their wolves simply gone. Not dormant. Gone. Within weeks, they start degrading. Sickness, rapid aging, death. Gareth took the documents with hands that trembled slightly, his tactical mind automatically parsing patterns, even as he tried to reject the implications. I watched him work through the data, watched the moment comprehension hit, watched his face pale as he understood what I was really telling him. The vampires, he said quietly. The war ended because they lost their power. This is what happened to them. Exactly. The Nexus undergoes a shift every 300 years. Species that haven't maintained their connection lose access to primal magic. The vampires went through this 50 years ago. Now it's our turn. I moved closer still, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that my wolf was practically purring with approval. Unless we can stabilize the Nexus. And for that, I need your memories, your experience, everything you felt when your son died. The hammer fell from his hand, clattering on the forge floor with a sound like a judge's gavel. You're asking me to relive the worst moment of my life, to experience my son's death again, in detail, for the sake of data collection. I'm asking you to make his sacrifice mean something. I held his gaze, refusing to look away, even when the intensity of his stare made my wolf whimper with submissive instinct. He died trying to protect our people. Died gathering information about the Nexus. Let me finish what he started. Let his death save the species he was trying to defend. Gareth turned away, but not before I saw the moisture gathering in his eyes. Strong hands gripped the edge of the forge, knuckles white with tension. His scent shifted, pain and grief rolling off him in waves that made my chest ache with sympathetic response. This was the moment. The point where he either agreed or sent me away, and I would have to return to the council empty-handed, forced to watch our species slide toward extinction without the key piece of information that might save us. I did something I had not planned, something my professional training said was a terrible idea. I reached out and placed my hand over his, skin-to-skin contact that sent electricity racing up my arm and made both our wolves sit up and take notice. I know what it costs, I said softly. I lost my husband at the Battle of Thornridge, 15 years ago, same time frame as Crimson Vale. He held the line while our forces retreated, died buying time measured in minutes. The council gave me medals and pensions, but none of it brought him back. None of it made the empty bed less cold, or the silence less deafening. Gareth's head turned slightly, not quite looking at me, but acknowledging my words. Then you understand why I can't go back to that moment. Why I've spent 15 years building a life that doesn't require me to remember. I understand why you think you can't. I tightened my grip on his hand, feeling the calluses earned through forge work, the strength that even isolation had not diminished. But I also know you're stronger than you believe. The reports from Crimson Vale said you collapsed, screamed, experienced trauma that should have killed you or driven you mad. But you survived. You woke up. You kept breathing. That takes a kind of strength most people don't possess. He finally turned to face me fully, and the devastation in his eyes nearly made me step back. I'm not strong. I'm a coward who ran away rather than face what I'd done. I sent my son to die, and I couldn't even stay to watch the consequences. You sent a soldier to complete a mission during wartime. That's not murder. That's command. I moved my hand to his face, cupping his jaw in a gesture far too intimate for someone I'd just met. But my wolf was insisting, and my human logic was too overwhelmed to resist. And you've punished yourself for 15 years. Don't you think that's enough? Don't you think it's time to let that punishment serve a purpose beyond self-destruction? For a moment we stood frozen in tableau, his eyes searching mine, looking for judgment, and finding only understanding. My hand on his face, thumb tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the rasp of stubble and the heat of skin that had not known gentle touch in far too long. our wolves circling each other in the space between consciousness, recognizing something neither of us was ready to name. Then Gareth pulled away, severing the contact, but I saw the decision in his eyes before he spoke. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Relief flooded through me, though I kept my expression professionally neutral. "Come to the Nexus archive. Undergo memory extraction protocols. They're not comfortable but not invasive. A week of your time, maybe less. After that, you can return here if you choose." "If I choose." He studied me carefully. "But you're hoping I won't. You're hoping that once I'm involved, once I see the scope of the problem, I'll stay. Help with whatever comes next." I had not expected him to be quite so perceptive. "I'm hoping you'll make the choice that feels right when the time comes. I won't lie to you or manipulate you. This is too important for games." Gareth was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll need 2 days to finish a commission and secure the forge. Where should I meet you?" "There's an inn 3 miles down the mountain, the Silver Pine. I'll arrange transportation." I started to leave, then paused. "Thank you for agreeing to help. I know what it costs." "You don't know the half of it," he said quietly, "but I suppose it's time to find out if the debt can ever actually be paid." I left him there in the forge light, my wolf whining at the separation, even though logic said we had just met. This was professional. There was no reason for the bone-deep sense of recognition that made every instinct scream that I had just found something I had not even known I was looking for. The walk back to the Silver Pine took an hour through darkness that seemed deeper after the forge's warm glow. I used the time to analyze what had just happened, to catalog my responses, and determine where my professional objectivity had failed. The hand on his face, the intimate tone, the way I had shared my own grief as currency to purchase his cooperation. All of it was outside normal recruitment protocol. All of it suggested emotional investment I could not afford. But my wolf did not care about protocol. My wolf had recognized something in Gareth Ironpeak that transcended logic or professional boundaries, had recognized a mate. I forced the thought away again, focusing instead on the mission parameters. Gareth had agreed to the memory extraction. That was step 1. Everything else could wait until we understood the full scope of what we were facing. The inn was warm and well-maintained, a way station for travelers moving between territories. I secured a room and sent a runner to arrange council transport, then sat by the fire trying to read research documents and failing completely because my mind kept returning to the forge, to gold eyes fractured by grief, to the way his scent had made my wolf respond in ways I had not felt since I was newly mated at 22 years old. This was dangerous, complicated, absolutely the worst possible timing for attraction to bloom, which of course meant my wolf was completely enamored, and my human logic was struggling to maintain any kind of control. 3 days later, the council transport arrived to collect us both. Gareth appeared precisely on time, carrying a single pack that suggested a man used to traveling light, wearing clothes that were clean but well worn. He had trimmed his hair slightly, brought his appearance closer to military standards, and I caught the scent of soap and something underneath that was purely him. My wolf approved enthusiastically. I told my wolf to be quiet and focus on the mission. "Ready?" I asked as he approached. "No," Gareth said honestly. "But I've learned that readiness is overrated. Sometimes you just have to walk into the fire and trust you'll find a way through." We boarded the transport together, the interior designed for comfort and privacy. Expensive suspension, tinted windows, the kind of luxury that made it clear the council had resources to spare when they wanted something badly enough. Gareth sat across from me, maintaining careful distance, his body language closed and defensive. But I noticed the way his eyes tracked my movements, the way his breathing shifted when our gazes met, the subtle signs that suggested his wolf was as interested as mine, and he was fighting it just as hard. The silence stretched for perhaps 30 minutes before I broke it. "Tell me about your forge work. What do you make?" He seemed surprised by the question, had probably expected clinical discussion of Nexus phenomena or mission parameters. "Hunting knives mostly, some tools. Occasionally a blade for someone who knows enough to ask for quality over flash." "Do you enjoy it?" "It's honest work." Gareth's hands moved as he spoke, unconsciously shaping air as if working in visible metal. "You start with raw material, apply heat and force and skill, end with something useful. There's a purity to it. You know immediately if you've succeeded or failed. No politics, no second guessing, just the metal and the fire and your own capability." I found myself smiling despite the professional mask I was trying to maintain. Sounds peaceful. It's predictable. Which isn't the same as peaceful, but it's close enough for a man who's had too much chaos. His eyes met mine directly for the first time since entering the transport. What about you? How does a combat specialist end up leading Nexus research? I needed something to do after the war ended. I leaned back, considering how much to reveal. 15 years of training to kill efficiently. When the fighting stopped, I had to figure out what a warrior does during peace. Turns out research uses similar skills: pattern recognition, strategic thinking, the ability to function on minimal sleep and bad coffee. I remember that coffee, Gareth said, and something that might have been a smile touched his face. Tasted like it was filtered through a boot. The very same boot you marched in for 12 hours. The exchange felt dangerously normal, like two people getting to know each other rather than professional colleagues on a mission. I should have redirected to business topics. Instead, I heard myself asking, "Do you miss it? Leading soldiers, the clarity of command." The almost smile faded. I miss believing my decisions mattered, that the sacrifices served a purpose worth the cost. He looked out the window at passing landscape. Now I'm not sure any of it mattered. The war ended. The vampires faded not because we defeated them, but because the Nexus took their power. All those deaths, all that blood, and it was just cosmic timing that decided the victor. Your leadership kept people alive until cosmic timing could work in our favor, I said firmly. The deaths mattered because without your tactical genius, there would have been far more of them. You gave soldiers a chance to survive. That's not nothing. Gareth turned back to me, studying my face as if trying to determine whether I actually believed what I was saying or was simply offering comfortable lies. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because some of the tension in his shoulders eased. "You're very good at this," he observed. "At what?" "Making broken things feel like they might be repairable." His voice was quiet, but not weak. "Is that part of your research training or just a natural talent?" I felt heat creeping up my neck. "I don't think you're broken. I think you're someone who's been carrying impossible weight alone for too long. There's a difference." "Is there?" Gareth leaned forward slightly, and suddenly the space between us felt charged with something beyond professional courtesy. "Because from where I'm sitting, you look like someone carrying similar weight. Hiding it better maybe, but still there." He was too perceptive, too willing to see past the armor I wore. I should have deflected, changed subjects, reasserted professional boundaries. Instead, I found myself speaking truth I rarely acknowledged even to myself. My husband's last words were that he was proud of me. For years, I thought he meant my fighting ability, my tactical skills. Recently, I've wondered if he meant my capacity to keep going after he was gone, to not let grief destroy me the way it could have. "And have you kept going?" "I'm here. I'm functional. I get up every morning and do work that matters." I held his gaze, refusing to look away, even though the intimacy of the moment was making my wolf practically howl with approval. But I'm also alone. Haven't let anyone close since he died. Convinced myself that emotional distance was strength, rather than just another form of cowardice. The transport cabin felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Gareth's scent was stronger at this proximity, and I could see the moment his wolf recognized mine, could see the pupils dilating, the minute shift in posture that said his control was not as absolute as he wanted it to be. "We're a pair, aren't we?" he said softly. "Two broken people trying to pretend we're still whole. Hoping no one looks too closely and notices the cracks." "Maybe." I leaned forward as well, drawn by forces I did not entirely understand, and was not entirely sure I wanted to resist. Or maybe we're two people who survived things that should have destroyed us. That's not weakness. That's a kind of strength most people never have to develop. His hand moved as if to reach for me, then stopped halfway, hovering in the space between us. "I should warn you. I'm not good at this. Connection. Letting people in. I've spent 15 years making sure no one could get close enough to hurt me again." "I know." I closed the remaining distance, taking his hand in mine, feeling the calluses and the strength and the slight tremor that said this was costing him something to allow. "I'm not asking for promises, just honesty. We're going into something dangerous together. Better to acknowledge what's happening than pretend there's nothing between us." "And what is happening?" Gareth's thumb traced circles on my palm, the gesture unconscious and devastating in its simple intimacy. I don't know yet, I admitted. My wolf recognizes you in ways that terrify me. My human brain says this is terrible timing and worse judgment. But I'm tired of making every decision based on fear of being hurt again. We sat like that for long minutes, hands clasped, breathing synchronized, two wolves circling each other in the space between human consciousness and primal instinct. It was not a claiming, not a commitment, just acknowledgement that something was building between us, something that would not be ignored no matter how much logic said it should be. When we finally separated, when the transport began its descent into the valley where the archive waited, we both understood that whatever happened next, we were no longer alone in facing it. The Nexus archive rose from the valley floor like a monument to vampire arrogance transformed into lichened scholarship. Dark stone, soaring towers, architecture designed to intimidate and impress. Council banners flew from ramparts, white wolf on blue field. But the bones of the structure remained what they had always been. A fortress built by predators who believed themselves apex until cosmic forces proved them wrong. As we disembarked, I felt Gareth tense beside me, his military instincts cataloging defensive positions and tactical vulnerabilities, even as his conscious mind tried to maintain civilian detachment. Old habits, ingrained so deeply they operated automatically. A figure waited near the main entrance. Elder Valeria Nightwhisper, 60-plus years of accumulated knowledge and zero tolerance for social niceties. Her white hair was unbound, her robes marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly, her expression somewhere between anticipation and grim satisfaction. "Astrid," Valeria said in her smoke-damaged rasp, "you actually brought him. I had money on you failing." "Your faith is touching," I replied dryly. Valeria's eyes fixed on Gareth, cataloging and evaluating with disturbing intensity. "Gareth Iron Peak, the broken alpha, the ghost of Crimson Vale. You look better than expected. I thought 15 years of self-imposed exile would have left you more deteriorated." "Disappointing you already," Gareth said flatly. "Should I try harder?" To my surprise, Valeria smiled. "I like him. He's got spine. Good. You'll need it for what comes next." She turned and strode toward the entrance without checking if we followed. "Come, let's see if your memories can save us all, or if we're wasting time that's rapidly running out." The archive interior was a contradiction of vampire aesthetics and modern functionality. Soaring ceilings and ornate stonework housing equipment that hummed with contemporary power. Computers, analysis stations, containment fields glowing around what I recognized as Nexus fragments. I watched Gareth's reaction carefully. Saw him tense as his wolf recognized the wrongness of Nexus energy, the dissonance that made prey instincts scream warnings. But he kept walking, kept his breathing steady, maintained composure that spoke to years of discipline overriding instinct. "You feel it," Valeria observed, not a question. "The frequency mismatch. Nexus energy predates our evolution by millennia. Our wolves recognize it as other, as threat. Most people can't tolerate this environment for more than a few hours." "I'm not most people," Gareth said, though I noticed the slight catch in his breath, the way his hand clenched as we passed a particularly active fragment. Valeria led us deeper into the archive, down corridors lined with viewing windows showing sealed chambers. In one, a purple crystal pulsed with internal light. In another, something that looked like frozen lightning crackled against containment fields. Finally, we reached a heavy door that opened into a circular chamber marked with geometric patterns that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. At the center sat a medical chair complete with restraints. Gareth stopped at the threshold. "The restraints seem excessive for a non-invasive procedure." "They're for your protection," Valeria said, genuine concern entering her voice for perhaps the first time. "The recall can be intense. Patients sometimes thrash, fighting against memories they've suppressed. We've had broken bones. One person dislocated their own shoulder. The restraints keep you from hurting yourself when the past becomes more real than the present." She moved to a console, began entering commands that brought equipment online with a rising hum. "Last chance to walk away, Iron Peak. Once we start, stopping risks neural damage. You'll experience everything from Crimson Vale again. Every sensation, every emotion, the pain, the loss. All of it as if 15 years never passed." I watched Gareth's face, saw the war between self-preservation and duty, between the desire to run and the need to make his son's death mean something. Saw the moment decision crystallized, saw his shoulders square with old military bearing. "Do it," he said, and moved toward the chair before courage could abandon him. I stayed near the door, hands clenched at my sides, watching as Valeria secured the restraints, watching as metal clicked into place around wrists and ankles and chest, as Gareth's breathing shifted to the controlled pattern of someone managing fear through sheer force of will. His eyes found mine across the chamber. "If this breaks me, if I don't come back whole, promise me you'll complete the mission. Don't abort because I couldn't handle it. You'll come back," I said with more certainty than I felt. "You survived it once. You'll survive it again." "You don't know that." "No," I admitted, "but I believe it. Sometimes that has to be enough." Valeria's hand hovered over the final control, initiating resonance in stages. First warmth, then pressure, then memory surfacing. "Don't fight it. Fighting makes it worse. Let yourself fall into the past and trust will pull you back." She activated the sequence. The warmth came first, spreading through Gareth's body like summer sun. I watched tension ease from his muscles, watched his breathing slow and deepen as the initial phase took effect. Then the pressure, air thickening, pushing against skin from all directions. Then the memories. I saw the moment it hit. Gareth's entire body went rigid against the restraints, eyes flying open, pupils blown wide. A sound escaped his throat, something between gasp and sob, and I felt it like a physical blow to my own chest. The bond between us, newly formed and barely acknowledged, carried echoes of his pain. He was in the command tent, reading casualty reports. He was feeling the pack bond stretch and fray. He was experiencing his son's death not as observer, but as participant. The agony of dissolution cell by cell, consciousness fragmenting into component pieces even as it desperately tried to hold together. The monitors screamed warnings as Gareth's vitals spiked. Blood vessels burst in his eyes from the strain. His body convulsed against the restraints hard enough that I heard metal groaning under the pressure. I started forward instinctively, needing to do something, to stop this, to protect him from trauma that was tearing him apart. But Valeria's hand shot out, stopping me. "Don't," she commanded. "Interrupting now could cause permanent damage. He has to ride it out." "He's dying," I said, my voice breaking on the word. "He's remembering dying. Different thing." But Valeria's hands flew across the console, trying to modulate intensity, trying to keep him alive through the recall, even as data poured into her systems. Through the bond I barely understood, I felt Gareth fragmenting, felt him losing grip on who and what he was as the memory consumed everything. Felt him slipping away into darkness that wanted to keep him, to dissolve him into the collective trauma of Crimson Veil. Without conscious thought, I pushed past Valeria and placed my hands on Gareth's chest, directly over his heart. Felt the frantic hammering beneath my palms, felt my wolf surge forward, lending strength through the nascent mate bond we had not yet acknowledged or claimed. "Gareth," I said firmly, pouring will and certainty into the words. "You're not there. You're here, with me, in the archive. You survived this once, survive it again." Through the connection, I felt him recognize my voice, felt him use it as anchor to pull himself back toward coherent consciousness. The dying continued washing over him, relentless, but he could observe now without being entirely consumed. "That's it," I encouraged, maintaining contact even though the energy backlash was making my own body shake. "Hold on to who you are. You're Gareth Ironpeak, War Alpha, father, survivor. You are not your grief. You are not your loss. You are the man who kept breathing after the world ended." Slowly, incrementally, the convulsions eased. The monitors began showing vitals returning to survivable ranges, and Gareth's eyes, wild and fractured, began focusing on my face, on the present, on the woman anchoring him to reality when the past tried to drown him. The extraction program ran its course and terminated. Valeria released the restraints with shaking hands. Gareth collapsed forward into my arms, the weight of him nearly taking me to the floor. But I held on, supporting him, letting him shake with aftershocks while tears streamed down his face unchecked. "You survived," I whispered against his hair. "You made it through. I've got you." He clung to me like a drowning man finding driftwood, his breathing ragged, his control shattered. And I held him through it, this powerful alpha reduced to raw humanity. stripped of every defense by the simple brutality of remembering the worst moment of his life. Valeria stood at her console, staring at data that made no sense, at readings that should not exist. When she finally spoke, her voice carried wonder and fear in equal measure. "Impossible," she breathed, then louder. "This is impossible." "What?" I asked, still holding Gareth, still feeling the tremors running through his frame. Valeria turned to face us, her expression caught between scientific excitement and existential terror. The extraction picked up secondary resonance, an active consciousness signature originating from beyond the veil. Gareth didn't just remember the event. He made contact with something still existing in the nexus between space. She met my eyes first, then Gareth's as he slowly lifted his head. "Your son is alive," she said. "Not as we understand life, but aware, conscious, existing in the between space, and he's been trying to communicate for 15 years. The world tilted. I felt Gareth's legs give out completely, lowered him carefully to the floor as the weight of revelation crashed over him. Alive. After 15 years of grief, of guilt, of believing himself responsible for murder disguised as duty, his son was alive. The sound that came from Gareth's throat was too big for words, too vast for the architecture of human vocal cords. His wolf threw back its head and howled, a sound of grief and fury and desperate hope that shook the very stones of the archive. I howled with him, unable to stop myself, my wolf responding to his pain, to his need, to the bond between us that grew stronger with every shared moment of vulnerability. When silence finally returned, when we could both breathe again without sobbing, Gareth looked at me with eyes that had changed, still fractured, still carrying weight. But underneath the grief, something new. Purpose, hope, the terrible, dangerous possibility of redemption. "Tell me how to get him back," Gareth said, his voice raw but steady. "Tell me what I have to do." Valeria's expression was grave. "I don't know if we can. The between space is not meant for living consciousness. What exists there might not be your son anymore. 15 years in that environment changes things in ways we don't understand." "I don't care," Gareth said, pulling himself to his feet with my support. 15 years I thought he was dead. 15 years I carried guilt for sending him to die. You're telling me there's even a chance of bringing him home, and you think I'll walk away?" He turned to me, and I saw the man he must have been before grief hollowed him out. The war alpha who had inspired soldiers to believe victory was possible. The father who would burn the world to save his child. "I'm not leaving," Gareth said firmly. "Not until we stabilize the nexus, not until we save the species, and not until I find a way to bring my son home. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, I'm seeing this through to the end." The determination in his voice filled the chamber, transformed him from broken hermit to something approaching his old command presence. And watching him reclaim pieces of himself, watching purpose override isolation, I felt my wolf respond with approval that went far beyond professional admiration. This was an alpha worth following, worth fighting beside, worth risking everything to protect, worth claiming as mate if he would accept the bond. But that was a complication for another day. Right now, we had a mission, a species to save, and a lost son to find in the impossible spaces between worlds. I took Gareth's hand, threading my fingers through his, claiming connection he did not pull away from. "Then let's get started. Time to save everyone, including the ones we thought were lost forever." His hand tightened on mine, accepting the partnership, accepting the support, accepting that he was no longer alone in facing impossible odds. Together we turned to face whatever came next. And for the first time in 15 years, both of us allowed ourselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future could be something other than endless gray. Maybe it could be hope. Recovery was not a straight line. It was 3 days of watching Gareth fracture and reform, watching him wake screaming from nightmares where his son's death played on endless loop, watching him struggle to reconcile 15 years of guilt with the impossible truth that Aiden still existed somewhere in the between space. I stayed close, not because the mission required it, because my wolf would not tolerate distance from a mate in distress, and because the human part of me had stopped pretending this was purely professional, the moment I felt his pain echo through the nascent bond between us. On the 4th morning, Valeria summoned us to her laboratory. I found Gareth already there, studying the grief fields fragment through its containment case. He looked like he had aged a decade in 3 days, new lines carved around his eyes, silver more prominent in his dark hair. But his shoulders were square, his jaw set with determination I recognized from old war photographs. The broken alpha was remembering how to be whole. "You look better," I said, moving to stand beside him. Close enough that our arms brushed, close enough that his scent wrapped around me like a physical touch. "I look like hell," Gareth corrected. But his mouth quirked in something almost approaching a smile. "But I'm functional, that's improvement." His hand found mine without looking, fingers interlacing in a gesture that was becoming natural, despite how new this connection was. My wolf practically purred at the contact, at the claiming implicit in his casual possession. Valeria cleared her throat pointedly. "When you two are finished being disgustingly couple-like, I have news. None of it good." We separated reluctantly, turning our attention to the elder scholar, who looked like she had not slept in the 3 days since the extraction. Her white hair was more disheveled than usual, her robe stained with what I hoped was coffee, her expression carrying the manic energy of someone who had made breakthrough after terrible breakthrough. "The fragment is dying," Valeria announced without preamble. Separated from its anchoring point, Nexus energy degrades. At current decay rates, 6 weeks maximum before it becomes inert, useless for stabilization. "So we have less time than we thought," I said, tactical mind already adjusting parameters. "How does that affect our retrieval schedule?" "It means we can't just collect fragments and assemble them later. They need to be combined in sequence as we retrieve them. Grieffield's fragment is the foundation. Crimson Veil builds on that. Archive Vault completes the matrix." Valeria pulled up schematics showing energy flow patterns. Miss one piece or combine them out of order, the whole structure collapses. Gareth studied the diagrams with the focus of a commander planning assault routes. "Crimson Veil is next then. How soon can we move?" "Tomorrow at dawn," Valeria said. "But there's something you need to understand about the Veil Echo." She looked directly at Gareth, her expression grave. "It's not collective trauma like the grief fields. It's personal, singular. It's your son." I felt Gareth tense beside me, saw his jaw clench. "Explain." "The Echo isn't Aiden. It's a manifestation of his death, his final moments, replayed and amplified by Nexus energy. It will look like him, sound like him, use his memories, his voice, everything you loved about him to destroy you psychologically." Valeria moved closer, her voice softening in rare gentleness. "It will convince you that you killed him. Show you every alternative timeline where he lives because you made different choices. Make you feel the full weight of his death as your personal failure." "I already feel that," Gareth said quietly. "Not like this. The Echo amplifies everything, makes it fresh, unbearable, inescapable." Valeria glanced at me. At the grief fields he could resist because the deaths weren't personal. At Crimson Veil, he faces the one death that defines his entire existence, and it will use his love for his son as a weapon. My wolf snarled protectively. The thought of Gareth facing that alone, being psychologically tortured by a supernatural construct wearing his dead child's face, made every instinct scream to prevent it. "Can I go with him?" I asked. "Into the crater, provide anchor like I did during the extraction." "The Echo will attack you as a distraction," Valeria said. "Try to remove you so it can focus entirely on Gareth. But your presence might help. The mate bond is strong, even unformed. It could provide grounding." "Mate bond?" Gareth's voice was carefully neutral, but I felt his attention sharpen. "That's what this is?" Heat crept up my neck. We had not discussed it explicitly, had been dancing around the reality that our wolves had recognized each other as potential mates. Saying it aloud made it real in ways that terrified me. "My wolf recognized you at the forge," I admitted, meeting his eyes. "I've been trying to maintain professional distance, but apparently my wolf had other ideas. If that's not something you want, if I'm reading this wrong, tell me now before it gets more complicated." Gareth was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those fractured gold eyes. Then his hand cupped my face with surprising gentleness, thumb tracing my cheekbone in a gesture that made my breath catch. "I'm 53 years old, Astrid, broken in ways I'm still discovering, probably going to die on this mission doing something stupid to save my son." His voice was rough but honest. "I have no right to claim a mate. No right to ask anyone to tie themselves to a man who's more wreckage than whole." "But," I prompted, leaning into his touch despite myself, "but my wolf recognized you too. And the human part of me is tired of being alone, tired of punishing myself by denying connection." He leaned his forehead against mine, breathing me in. If you're willing to take a broken alpha who comes with more baggage than anyone should carry, then yes. I want this. Want you. Complications and all. My wolf howled in triumph. I kissed him before I could overthink it, claiming his mouth with 15 years of loneliness channeled into desperate need for contact. He responded immediately, one hand tangling in my hair, the other gripping my waist like I was the only solid thing in a dissolving world. The kiss was not gentle. It was fierce and hungry. Two predators recognizing each other and staking claim through taste and scent, and the simple physics of breath shared between souls that had found their missing piece. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Valeria was watching us with an expression caught between amusement and exasperation. "Are you finished?" she asked dryly. "Because we still have a species to save, and I'd prefer to do it before you two consummate the bond in my laboratory." "We're finished," I said, though Gareth's hand remained possessively on my waist, thumb stroking small circles that made concentration difficult. "What else do we need to know?" "The council wants to see you both. Formal briefing in 2 hours." Valeria's expression turned darker. "There's resistance to the mission. Certain council members think resources would be better spent on other options." "What other options?" Gareth asked. "Letting the unraveling happen to the 40-plus generation, preserving magic only for those under 30. Valeria's voice was flat, clinical. "Theron Bloodmane is leading the opposition. His daughter is 28. He sees this as an opportunity to eliminate what he considers dead weight." The temperature in the room dropped. Gareth's scent shifted, taking on the sharp edge of a predator recognizing threat. "He wants to sacrifice an entire generation to protect his own bloodline. He frames it as ensuring species survival," Valeria said. "Hard to argue against when our birth rate has been 0 for over a year. From certain perspectives, it's logical. Cut losses, preserve youth, rebuild from stronger foundation. From my perspective, it's cowardice dressed in strategy." Gareth's voice carried alpha command, the tone that had once made soldiers move mountains. "We don't abandon people because saving them is difficult. We find a way, or we die trying." I felt my wolf respond to that authority, to the strength emerging as purpose replaced isolation. This was the war alpha. This was the leader who had turned impossible odds into unlikely victories. This was my mate. The possessive satisfaction of that thought should have disturbed me. Instead, it felt right in a way few things ever had. The council chambers smelled of old wood and older power, a room where decisions affecting thousands were made by people who believed authority was divine right. I stood beside Gareth, feeling his hand brush mine in subtle reassurance, watching council members file in with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. High Commander Marcus Ashenfell entered last, and I watched Gareth's face transform. These two had history, friendship forged in war that had survived 15 years of silence. Marcus took his seat at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral. "Your proposal is irregular. You want council resources for a retrieval operation based on theoretical protocols. You want a team assembled around personal knowledge of Nexus phenomena. And you want operational authority despite having no current rank." "What I want is irrelevant," Gareth said, his voice steady. "What we need is survival. Your data confirms the unraveling is accelerating. In 6 months, maybe less, every Lycan over 40 loses their wolf permanently. That includes you, Marcus. That includes 70% of your command structure." He let that sink in, watched council members shifting uncomfortably. "The fragments are real. Stabilization theory is sound. All that's missing is willingness to do dangerous work. I'm volunteering to be expendable. Use me. If it works, everyone benefits. If it fails, you've lost a hermit nobody wanted anyway." Theron Bloodmane stood slowly, a movement designed to intimidate through controlled violence. "You forget yourself, Iron Peak. This council does not answer to failed alphas who abandoned responsibilities when the cost became inconvenient." I felt Gareth's anger spike through our bond, felt his wolf surge toward the surface. But before he could respond, I stepped forward. "With respect, Council Head, Gareth Iron Peak has more tactical experience than anyone in this room. He's survived direct Nexus contact. He's undergone memory extraction that should have destroyed him. And he's willing to risk everything to save people who haven't given him any reason to care." My voice was sharp, protective instinct overriding political caution. What exactly have you risked lately beyond comfort and pride? The room went silent. Several council members looked shocked that I had dared speak so bluntly. Theron's expression turned dangerous. "And who are you to question this council?" he asked coldly. "Astrid Frostborn, combat specialist, Western Flank commander during the war, lead researcher for the Nexus Study Commission." I held his gaze without flinching. "I'm the one who's been documenting the unraveling for 3 years while you debated policy. I'm the one who found the only person capable of helping. And I'm the one telling you that if you reject this mission, you're condemning 60,000 people to death because you're too afraid to try." Theron's hand moved to his weapon, an instinctive response to challenge. But Gareth was suddenly between us, his body a shield, his scent rolling out in waves of pure alpha dominance that made every wolf in the room sit up and take notice. "You want to fight someone, Bloodmane, fight me." Gareth's voice was deadly quiet. "But you touch her, threaten her, even look at her wrong again, and I will remind you what a war alpha is capable of when protecting his mate." The word mate hung in the air. I felt multiple council members' attention sharpen, felt the shift in dynamics as they recalculated our threat level. Marcus stood abruptly. "Enough. Both of you sit down." His command voice filled the chamber. "We're here to evaluate an operational proposal, not measure dominance." He waited until Theron resumed his seat, then turned to Gareth with an expression that somehow managed to be both stern and sympathetic. "The Council has reviewed the research. We understand the stakes. What we question is your objectivity. Your son is trapped in the Nexus. Can you guarantee that won't compromise mission integrity?" "No," Gareth said honestly. "I can't guarantee anything except that I'll give everything I have to make this work. If that's not enough, find someone else. But you won't. Because nobody else survived Nexus contact. Nobody else has the experience. You need me whether you want to admit it or not." Marcus studied his old friend for a long moment. "I'm assigning myself as council observer. I go with you. Provide real-time updates and ensure resources are used appropriately." "Absolutely not," Gareth said immediately. "You're the High Commander. You can't risk yourself on a field operation. I'm 47 years old. The unraveling has already started in me. I can feel my wolf weakening daily." Marcus's voice was firm. "If this mission succeeds, I benefit. If it fails, I was dying anyway. And I won't let my best friend walk into hell without someone to watch his back." The two men stared at each other, years of shared history flowing in the silence between them. Finally, Gareth nodded once, accepting. The vote came quickly after that. Approval for the mission with Marcus as observer. 3 months to complete retrieval and stabilization. And one more addition that made my protective instincts flare. "Ronan Silvermane will join as tracker," Marcus announced. "The unraveling is advanced in him. 8 weeks maximum before his wolf is gone completely," he volunteered. I knew Ronan by reputation. 62 years old, legendary pathfinder, the kind of scout who could track ghosts through snowstorms. If he was already losing his wolf, he had nothing to lose and everything to prove. It made tactical sense. It also meant our team was composed entirely of people the unraveling was actively killing. Desperate, motivated, dangerous. After the council session, Gareth and I retreated to the quarters they had assigned us. Separate rooms initially, but neither of us bothered with the pretense. He followed me into mine, and we stood in the small space breathing each other in, processing what had just happened. "You defended me in front of the council," Gareth said quietly. "Called me your mate in public. Do you understand what that means?" "It means I'm claiming you," I replied, moving into his space. "Unless you have objections." "Only one." He cupped my face, thumb tracing my bottom lip. "I'm not sure what I'm offering is worth claiming. A broken man with impossible mission and very high probability of death. You're offering yourself. That's enough." I kissed him softly, then deeper when he responded. "I've been alone for 15 years, Gareth. Convinced myself that emotional distance was strength. You're teaching me it was just fear. Fear of being hurt again. Fear of losing someone else I love." His arms came around me, holding me close. "I don't want you to love me. Love means pain when I inevitably do something stupid and heroic." "Too late," I whispered against his chest. "My wolf chose you at the forge. My heart followed at the extraction. I'm all in whether you like it or not." Gareth was quiet for a long moment, just holding me, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion barely contained. "Then we'd better survive this mission. Because I'm just starting to remember what living feels like, and I'm not ready to give that up." We made love that night with desperate tenderness. Two people who had been alone too long discovering what connection felt like when freely given. It was not just physical. It was the mate bond clicking into place, wolves recognizing and claiming, souls intertwining in ways that would not be easily severed. Afterward, lying in the darkness with his arms around me, I felt more complete than I had in 15 years. Also more terrified, because now I had something to lose again. "Tell me about your husband," Gareth said quietly. "I should know about the man who had you first." I was surprised by the request, but the jealousy in it was gentle, more curiosity than possession. His name was Eric. We met at 20, mated at 22. He was kind and strong and believed the war could be won through courage and honor. And he was wrong? He was right enough to die holding the line, wrong enough to think courage was sufficient. I turned in his arms to face him. I loved him, but we were young. Our bond was formed in idealism, in the certainty that comes before reality teaches you how much loss costs. "And now?" Gareth asked. "Now I know exactly how much this could cost. Know that loving you means watching you walk into Crimson Vale to face psychological torture. Means accepting you might not come back whole." I touched his face, memorizing the lines and scars. "I'm choosing it anyway, because you're worth the risk." He kissed me again, slow and thorough, claiming me in ways that went beyond physical. When we finally slept, it was tangled together, breathing synchronized, two wolves who had found their pack of two. The next morning brought the team together for final briefing. Ronan Silvermane was everything his reputation suggested. Weathered leather and old scars given human form, 62 years of hard miles written across his face. But his eyes were sharp, alert, the eyes of a predator who refused to quit, even as his body betrayed him. "So," Ronan said, his voice gravelly, "we're the Suicide Squad. The desperate, the dying, and the damned. This ought to be interesting." "More like experienced, motivated, and capable," I corrected. "We've all survived things that should have killed us. That's advantage, not weakness." Valeria activated the display, showing Crimson Vale in sickening detail. The crater where the Nexus Stone had detonated was a scar on the landscape, vegetation growing in wrong patterns, Earth still glowing faintly with residual energy. "The fragment is here," she pointed to the crater center. "The echo is already active, waiting. It knows someone will come eventually." "How do we approach?" Marcus asked, tactical mind working. "Gareth goes to the crater center," Valeria said. "The echo is tuned to him specifically. If the rest of us stay at the perimeter, it might focus entirely on him and burn out faster." "No," I said immediately. "We don't send him in alone. The echo will attack you as distraction," Valeria argued. "Your presence might make things worse, or the mate bond might provide anchor." I looked at Gareth. "Like it did during the extraction. I'm not letting you face this alone." Something warm flickered in his eyes. "It's dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. At least this way we face it together." Marcus studied us both, then nodded. "Astrid goes with Gareth to the crater. Ronan, Valeria, and I maintain perimeter. Provide support if needed, extract the fragment when the echo releases it." It was not perfect tactics, but it acknowledged that sometimes the heart had strategic value logic could not quantify. The transport carried us south toward Crimson Vale through landscape that grew progressively more scarred. I sat beside Gareth, our hands clasped, both of us preparing in our own ways for what waited. "Whatever the echo shows you," I said quietly, "remember it's not real. It's manipulation designed to break you." "I know." Gareth's thumb traced circles on my palm. "But knowing and believing are different things when you're watching your son die wearing his actual face. Then hold on to me. Use me as anchor. We survive this together or not at all." His hand tightened on mine. "I don't want you hurt because of me." "Too late. I'm bonded to you now. Your pain is my pain, whether I'm in that crater or standing on the rim." I turned to face him fully. "Let me help. Let me be strong when you can't be." The transport began descending into the valley. Through the windows, Crimson Vale appeared. A wound in the landscape that had never healed, earth broken and twisted, the very air thick with wrongness that made my wolf whine. At the crater's edge, we stopped. The team assembled, checking gear, preparing for a battle that would be entirely psychological rather than physical. Gareth stood at the precipice, looking down into the heart of the place where his son had died. I moved to stand beside him, took his hand, felt him grip it like a lifeline. "Ready?" I asked. "No," he said honestly. "But I've learned readiness is overrated." Together we descended into the crater, into the place where nightmares waited wearing familiar faces, into the heart of grief and guilt and the terrible possibility of redemption. The manifestation began immediately. The air shimmered, condensed, took shape. A young man appeared, 18 years old, wearing scout uniform. Dark hair, gray eyes that were heartbreakingly familiar, because they matched the man standing beside me. Aiden, not an echo, not a construct, but his son, exactly as Gareth remembered him. I felt Gareth's entire body go rigid, felt the shock of recognition slam through our bond like physical blow. This was going to be worse than anything at the grief fields. This was personal. This was the death that had defined 15 years. The echo smiled, and there was nothing innocent in it. "Hello, Dad. Did you miss me?" Gareth made a sound like he was dying. I tightened my grip on his hand, anchoring him, reminding him I was here. The echo's attention shifted to me. "And who's this? New mate already?" "That was fast. I've barely been dead 15 years and you've moved on." "You're not him," I said firmly. "You're a manifestation, a recording." "Does it matter?" The echo moved closer. "I have all his memories, all his thoughts, including the ones about dear old Dad. Want to know what he really thought? Want to know how much he resented being sent on suicide missions?" "Don't listen," I whispered to Gareth. "It's trying to manipulate you." But the echo was just getting started. The world around us shifted, and suddenly we were reliving Aiden's final mission. I felt it through Gareth, through the bond that connected us, experienced the approach to the Nexus Stone, the moment it recognized him, the detonation that tore him apart cell by cell. Gareth collapsed to his knees, dragging me down with him. Through our connection I felt his grief, his guilt, his absolute conviction that he had murdered his own son. "That's it," the echo encouraged. "Feel it all. Every moment of knowing you sent me to die. Every alternative where you made different choices and I lived." The visions came faster. Timelines where Gareth had refused permission, where Aiden had survived, grown into a man, found a mate, given Gareth grandchildren. Everything he had lost through one decision. I wrapped myself around Gareth, trying to shield him, trying to provide anchor against the assault. "You're not responsible," I said fiercely. "You made the best call you could with the information you had. That's not murder. That's command." "But what if I'm wrong?" Gareth's voice was breaking. "What if I chose duty over love and it was the wrong choice?" "Then you live with it," I said. "Like we all live with our choices. Like I live with not being there when my husband died. Like every leader lives with the weight of decisions that cost lives. You survive and you make the next choice count." The echo snarled, frustrated. It had expected Gareth to be alone, to have no anchor against the psychological assault. My presence was complicating its attack. "You think you can save him?" it hissed at me. "You think your bond is strong enough? Watch." The visions shifted. Now I was experiencing Aiden's death directly, not through Gareth's memories, but as if I were the one dying. Felt the Nexus energy tearing me apart, felt consciousness fragmenting, felt the desperate wish to survive dissolving into inevitable death. I screamed, could not help it. The pain was beyond anything I had experienced, beyond anything I could have imagined. This was what Gareth had felt through the pack bond 15 years ago. This was the trauma that had broken him. Through the agony, I felt Gareth's arms around me, felt him anchoring me the way I had been trying to anchor him. "Hold on," he said, his voice steady despite everything. "You're not dying. You're experiencing memory of dying. There's a difference." His certainty pulled me back. I clung to his voice, to his presence, to the mate bond that connected us. Slowly, the pain receded enough for thought to return. We were both kneeling in the mud now, holding each other, both shaking from the assault. The echo circled us, looking for weakness, for the crack that would let it dissolve us into collective trauma. "Why are you fighting?" it asked, almost curious. "Why not let go? Accept that you failed, Gareth. Accept that you killed your son and deserve to suffer for it." Gareth lifted his head, meeting the echo's eyes. When he spoke, his voice was raw but steady. Because my son deserves better than his death being used as weapon. Because somewhere in the nexus between space, the real Aiden is still aware, still waiting. And I'll be damned if I let a manifestation of trauma keep me from bringing him home. The echo flickered, surprised by the resistance. You think he wants to come home? You think he forgives you? I don't know, Gareth admitted. But I'm going to give him the choice. And to do that, I need to survive you. Need to retrieve the fragment and stabilize the nexus and find a way to reach him. He stood slowly, pulling me up with him. You're not my son. You're the worst parts of my grief-given shape. And I'm done letting grief control me. The echo's form began to destabilize. You can't just decide to stop grieving. You're right, I can't. The grief is real. The guilt is real. The weight of his death is something I'll carry until I die. Gareth's hand tightened on mine. But grief doesn't define me, doesn't control me. I'm more than the worst moment of my life. He looked at me, and I saw the man emerging from the wreckage. I'm also the man who found a second chance when I thought I didn't deserve one. The man who has a mate willing to walk into hell beside me. The man who's choosing to fight instead of hide. The echo screamed, a sound of pure, frustrated rage. Then it collapsed inward, energy imploding back to its source. Where it had stood, a crystal fragment pulsed with purple light. The second piece, I retrieved it with shaking hands while Gareth stood guard, both of us still trembling from the trial. As my fingers closed around the fragment, I felt a different presence. Not the echo, but actual consciousness reaching across dimensions. Dad, you did it. I'm so proud of you. The voice faded before either of us could respond, but the impact remained. Real Aiden, not the manifestation, had witnessed his father's victory over trauma. We climbed out of this crater on trembling legs to find the team waiting. Marcus ran to us, catching Gareth as his strength finally gave out. 2 fragments secured, I reported, though my voice shook. Mission continues. Valeria took the crystal, secured it with the first piece. The 2 fragments resonated together, their energy synchronizing into something that felt less hostile. One more, she said quietly. The vault fragment beneath the archive. Then we can attempt stabilization. As we boarded the transport for the return journey, I sat beside Gareth, both of us too exhausted for words. He pulled me against his chest, and I let myself rest there, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the mate bond solid and real between us. We had survived Crimson Vale, had faced psychological torture and emerged still ourselves, still together. Whatever came next, we would face it the same way, as mates, as partners, as 2 broken people who had found strength in each other that neither possessed alone. The archive vault should have been simplest, should have been just retrieval. But when we descended into the lower levels, we found Victor Ironjaw waiting with compelled guards, and I knew our mission had just become infinitely more complicated. Because some betrayals wore friendly faces, and some enemies had been hiding in plain sight all along. Victor Ironjaw stood in the vault chamber like a king surveying conquered territory. Council guards flanked him, their eyes blank with magical compulsion, weapons drawn but not yet aimed. The vault fragment pulsed in its alcove behind him, the final piece we needed to complete the stabilization matrix. I felt Gareth tense beside me, his wolf surging toward the surface as he recognized threat. My own instincts screamed danger, but tactical training kept me assessing. 6 guards, all compelled, which meant not in control of their actions. Victor positioned to block access to the fragment, and beneath it all, the sickening realization that this ambush had been planned. General Ironjaw, Marcus said carefully, hand moving to his weapon. Stand down. Those guards are under compulsion. Release them immediately. Victor smiled, the expression carrying dark satisfaction. Compulsion is such an ugly word, High Commander. I prefer cooperative. These loyal soldiers simply understand the necessity of difficult choices. He gestured toward the vault fragment. This piece represents power, real power. Not the fading magic of a dying species, but concentrated nexus energy that could be weaponized, controlled, used to make our kind apex predators again, instead of evolutionary failures sliding toward extinction. You're insane, I said flatly. That fragment is the key to stabilization. Without it, the unraveling continues. Everyone over 40 loses their wolf. Exactly. Victor's eyes glittered with zealot fervor. The old, the weak, the failed leadership that brought us to this point. Let them fade. Let them become mortal. The young, the strong, the ones still connected to primal power, they survive, they rebuild, they create a lichen civilization worth preserving instead of this geriatric mockery we've become. Understanding crashed over me like cold water. You're accelerating the unraveling, not trying to stop it, trying to weaponize it to eliminate an entire generation. Smart woman. Victor inclined his head. Your mate chose well. Pity you'll both die before you can appreciate the new world I'm building. Gareth moved so fast I barely tracked it, crossing the distance to Victor in a blur of alpha speed and fury. But the general was ready, magical barriers flaring to life as Gareth's claws raked against shimmering force. Did you really think I wouldn't prepare? Victor laughed. I've been planning this for 15 years, since the day I triggered the Nexus explosion at Crimson Vale, and discovered how beautifully Nexus energy could be manipulated to sever wolf bonds. The words hit Gareth like physical blows. I felt the shock ripple through our mate bond, felt his world fracture as terrible comprehension dawned. You killed my son. Gareth's voice was barely above a whisper, but the rage underneath made the air itself vibrate. You murdered Aiden for research. I advanced our understanding of Nexus mechanics, Victor corrected clinically. Your son's sacrifice, unfortunate as it was, paved the way for everything we now know about controlled severance. Those 6 scouts were test subjects. Their deaths taught me how to trigger the unraveling selectively. He smiled at Gareth's expression. And the guilt you carried, that delicious self-blame that made you controllable, made you hide instead of investigating. If you'd questioned, if you'd looked for evidence, you might have stopped me before I perfected the technique. But you were too busy punishing yourself to see the real enemy. Something inside Gareth broke. Not collapsed. Transformed. The guilt he had carried, the self-hatred, the conviction that he had killed his son through poor command. All of it burned away in the white-hot fury of understanding that he had not been responsible. Victor had murdered Aiden deliberately and let Gareth suffer for 15 years. The shift was instantaneous, man to wolf in a heartbeat. Gareth's beast massive and silver and absolutely done with restraint. He hit Victor's barrier with force that cracked stone beneath their feet, claws finding purchase where human hands had failed. The compelled guards moved to intervene, but Marcus and Ronan were already engaging, disabling them with practiced efficiency that avoided lethal force. These were innocent soldiers, not willing combatants. I raced toward the vault fragment, knowing we needed to secure it before Victor could destroy or weaponize it. But magical wards flared around the alcove, burning my skin when I tried to reach through. "Valeria!" I shouted. "I need those wards down!" The elder scholar was already moving, hands weaving complex patterns, muttering in languages that predated civilization. The wards flickered, weakened, but did not fall completely. Victor had layered his defenses too well. Behind me, Gareth and Victor were locked in brutal combat. The general fought with magic and cunning, barriers and attacks that should have overwhelmed even an alpha. But Gareth was beyond strategy, beyond pain, beyond anything except the primal need to destroy the thing that had stolen 15 years of his life to lies. Blood sprayed. I did not know whose. Gareth's wolf was taking damage but refused to fall, driven by rage too pure for magic to fully deflect. Through our bond, I felt his fury, his pain, his absolute conviction that Victor would not leave this chamber alive. Felt the moment his jaws finally found throat. Felt the satisfaction as teeth punctured flesh and crushed windpipe. Victor tried to speak, to cast final spells, but Gareth's grip was absolute. The general's eyes went wide with understanding that he had miscalculated. That guilt transformed into rage was more dangerous than guilt transformed into isolation. When Gareth finally released him, Victor collapsed, still breathing but barely, his throat a ruin, his magical defenses shattered by the simple physics of superior predator killing inferior prey. Gareth shifted back to human form, kneeling over the man who had destroyed his son. "Why?" he demanded, voice raw. "Why kill him? Why let me think it was my fault?" Victor coughed blood, smiled through broken teeth. "Because guilty father made you controllable. Made you hide instead of investigating. If you'd looked, you would have found evidence, would have stopped me before I perfected the technique." "You're dying for a theory," Gareth said quietly. "Was it worth it?" "My vision continues whether I live to see it. The unraveling accelerates, the old generation fades, and your son's death, it meant something after all, just not what you thought." Victor died still smiling, secure in the knowledge that even in death he had accomplished his goal. His vision would continue. The unraveling would not stop simply because he had fallen, unless we completed the stabilization. Valeria finally broke through the wards, and I grabbed the vault fragment, feeling its energy pulse against my palms. The third piece, the final component needed to save our species. But as the wards collapsed, something else woke in the depths beneath us. The vampire consciousness that had slumbered for decades, contained by the very fragment we had just removed. Darkness gathered, took on form, reached out with ancient malevolence toward living warmth. "We need to leave," Valeria said urgently. "Now, the containment is failing." We ran. Through corridors that suddenly felt wrong, air thick with presence that had been imprisoned and was now stirring, hungry and aware. Behind us, darkness pursued, not quite physical, but terrifyingly real. The team burst out of the vault levels, just as emergency protocols engaged, sealing the lower chambers to contain whatever horror we had accidentally released. I collapsed against Gareth, both of us breathing hard, blood on our hands from different sources. The fragment was secure, but the cost had been higher than anticipated. Victor's revelation had shattered 15 years of guilt, replacing it with fury that had no easy outlet now that the target was dead. "Are you all right?" I asked, checking him for injuries, my hands shaking with adrenaline crash and fear for my mate. "No," Gareth said honestly. "But I'm alive. We're alive. And we have all 3 fragments." He looked at the crystal in my hands, then at Valeria. "What happens next?" The elder scholar's expression was grim. "Now comes the hard part. The stabilization ritual requires an anchor, someone who stays connected to the nexus permanently, maintaining balance between our world and the between space. They'll exist in the realm where your son is trapped, forever aware, forever alone, forever maintaining the seal." "How long?" Marcus asked. "Eternity," Valeria said bluntly. "Or until someone else volunteers to take their place. Could be decades, could be centuries. The anchor exists outside normal time." Silence fell over the group as the weight of that settled. An eternity of isolation, of consciousness without contact, of existing solely to maintain magical framework that would save everyone except the anchor. "I'll do it," Gareth said quietly. "No." My voice was sharp, immediate. "We'll find another way." "There isn't another way." Valeria's tone was gentle but firm. "I've run every simulation. The mathematics are absolute. Someone stays in the between space or everyone loses their wolf." Ronan stood slowly from where he had been sitting against the wall. The old tracker looked like he had aged 20 years in the past hour, the unraveling visible in every line of his weathered face. "It should be me." Everyone turned to stare. "I'm dying anyway," Ronan continued, his gravelly voice steady. "Got maybe 2 weeks before my wolf is completely gone. 2 weeks versus Gareth's potential decades. The math is simple." He smiled that weathered smile that had seen too much and somehow still found humor. "And I told you from the start, I wanted my last hunt to matter. Becoming the eternal anchor, that matters. That's a legacy worth having." "Ronan," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion, "we can't ask that of you." "You're not asking. I'm volunteering." Ronan moved to stand before the assembled fragments, looking at them with the same calm he had probably shown before every dangerous hunt in a 62-year career. "I've been alone most of my life, wandering, tracking, never putting down roots. What's eternity compared to that? At least this way I serve a purpose instead of just fading into mortality and death with nobody to remember my name." He looked directly at Gareth. "You've got a chance at happiness. Got a mate who loves you. Got a son who might be reachable in the between space. Don't waste that by playing martyr. Live. Make the sacrifice count by actually living." Before anyone could stop him, before the weight of his decision could be questioned or debated, Ronan placed his hands on the fragments. The ritual began spontaneously. The 3 pieces of Nexus energy recognized acceptance, recognized willingness, recognized sacrifice offered freely. Ronan's body began to glow, to become translucent, to fade into the space between worlds. I grabbed Gareth's hand, holding tight as we watched a legend dissolve into light. Ronan's last words were a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber. "Tell them I mattered. Tell them Ronan Silvermane gave everything so they could keep their wolves. Tell them I chose this. Then he was gone. Not dead, but absent. Existing in the between space, maintaining the connection, holding the nexus stable through sheer force of will and acceptance of eternal isolation. The effect was immediate and profound. I felt my wolf surge with renewed strength, felt connections that had been fraying snap back into place. Across the territories I knew, lichens who had been losing their link to primal form were feeling their wolves return, feeling strength flowing back, feeling the unraveling stop and reverse. One man's sacrifice, saving 60,000 lives, the purest form of heroism imaginable. The team stood in silence, honoring a tracker who had wanted only to matter, who had found meaning in the ultimate gift of self. Gareth's hand tightened on mine until it was almost painful, his grief for Ronan mixing with relief that the species was saved and guilt that he was not the one who had paid the price. He chose, I said softly. He chose to matter. Don't dishonor that by wishing you had suffered instead. Gareth pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my hair, shaking with complicated emotions too tangled to separate. I held him through it, my mate, my alpha, the man who had lost too much but was learning to accept that survival could be its own form of victory. Valeria was already at her console, monitoring the stabilization. It's working, she said, wonder in her voice. The nexus is achieving equilibrium. The unraveling has stopped. We did it. But the triumph felt hollow against the cost. Ronan was gone. Victor was dead, but his manipulation had cost us years. And somewhere in the between space, Gareth's son still waited, trapped in the same realm where Ronan now existed as eternal guardian. Can we reach him? Gareth asked, lifting his head. Aiden, if Ronan is in the between space and conscious, can we communicate? Can we find a way to bring my son home? Valeria was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. The between space is not meant for living consciousness. But Ronan volunteered knowing what he was walking into. Your son was forced there through violence. They might exist differently. She met Gareth's desperate gaze. Give me time. Let me study the stabilization patterns. If there's a way to reach into the between space without destabilizing everything, I'll find it. But it could take years. I have years, Gareth said. For the first time in 15 years, I have a future that extends beyond the next hammer strike. I can wait as long as it takes. He looked at me, and I saw the man emerging fully from the wreckage. No longer broken, no longer hiding. Just Gareth. Flawed and grieving and absolutely determined to build something meaningful from the ashes of loss. We can wait, I corrected, threading my fingers through his. Together. The word mate hung between us, unspoken but understood. We had claimed each other in the midst of chaos, had formed bond that would not be easily broken. Whatever came next, we would face it as partners. The council convened emergency session to process everything that had happened. Victor's betrayal, Ronan's sacrifice, the successful stabilization of the nexus, and the awkward political reality that their high commander had been present for an unsanctioned execution and the release of ancient vampire consciousness from containment. Marcus handled it with the same competence he brought to everything. Framed Victor as rogue actor. Positioned Ronan as hero whose sacrifice demanded monument and remembrance. Made it clear that any attempt to punish or question Gareth's actions would be met with his immediate resignation. Theron tried to object, tried to spin the narrative toward condemning vigilante violence, but the simple fact that the unraveling had stopped, that lichens across the territories were reporting restored connection to their wolves, made him look petty and small. The vote came quickly. Official commendation for the team, full honors for Ronan, and appointment of Gareth as special advisor to the Council on Nexus Phenomena. A title that came with no authority but significant respect. Gareth accepted grudgingly, making it clear he had no intention of remaining at the archive permanently. I'll consult when needed, but I'm not a politician. I'm a craftsman who happens to understand Nexus energy. Use my knowledge, but don't expect me to play council games. Theron looked like he wanted to argue, but Marcus's expression made it clear that protecting Gareth was not negotiable. After the session, as we walked through the archive gardens, Gareth was quiet, processing everything. The revelation about Victor, the reality that Aiden's death had not been his fault, the weight of Ronan's sacrifice, the strange new future unfolding where he was no longer defined entirely by guilt and isolation. What are you thinking? I asked, sitting beside him on a bench surrounded by roses that bloomed without knowing they existed in a world of magic and monsters. That I spent 15 years carrying guilt that wasn't mine to carry, Gareth said slowly. That I could have had this connection and purpose and something approaching peace if I hadn't been so convinced I deserved to suffer. He turned to face me, taking both my hands in his. I wasted so much time, Astrid, hid in the mountains while life continued without me, and I can't get those years back. No, I agreed, but you can choose what happens with the years ahead. I moved closer, close enough that our foreheads touched. You can choose to build instead of hide, to love instead of isolate, to be the man Aiden would be proud of instead of the broken shell Victor wanted you to become. Gareth kissed me, soft and thorough, claiming me in the peaceful garden the same way he had claimed me in desperate moments of crisis. When we separated, both breathing hard, his eyes held certainty I had not seen before. Mate with me, he said. Not just bond, full claiming. I want the world to know you're mine and I'm yours. I want to build a life that matters, and I want to build it with you. My wolf howled in triumph. My heart, which had been locked behind walls for 15 years, opened completely. Yes, I said simply, yes to all of it. All of. The claiming ceremony happened 3 days later, witnessed by Marcus and Valeria, and a handful of people we trusted. It was not the elaborate political affair the council would have preferred. It was simple and honest. Two wolves recognizing each other and making that recognition permanent through ritual and magic, and the simple physics of choice. When Gareth marked me, when his teeth found the junction of neck and shoulder and left permanent claim, I felt the mate bond snap into place fully. Not the tentative connection we had been building, but complete integration. His emotions accessible to me, mine to him. Two souls choosing to be permanently intertwined. The claiming feast afterward was small but genuine. Marcus gave a toast about stubborn friends who refused to stay buried in grief. Valeria, slightly drunk, made inappropriate comments about biological imperative and successful mate selection. We laughed, ate, celebrated life in the face of all the death we had witnessed. That night, alone in our quarters, Gareth and I made love with the desperate intensity of people who had nearly lost everything and were determined to hold tight to what remained. The mate bond amplified everything, turned physical pleasure into spiritual communion, made us more than sum of parts. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets, both sated and peaceful, Gareth traced the claiming mark on my neck with gentle fingers. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me. For seeing past the broken alpha to the man underneath. For being stubborn enough to walk into my isolation and drag me back to living. He kissed my forehead. For being exactly what I needed when I didn't even know I needed it. I curled closer, breathing in his scent, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. You did the same for me. I was hiding in research, convincing myself that emotional distance was strength. You taught me that vulnerability could be its own kind of courage. We fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, mate bond humming with contentment, two wolves who had found their pack of two. The years that followed were not easy, but they were meaningful. Valeria spent 5 years researching the between space before making her first breakthrough. A way to send limited communication into the realm where Ronan maintained his vigil, and Aiden existed in whatever form 15 years had transformed him into. The first message from Aiden came on a cold morning in late autumn. Just 3 words, but they meant everything. I forgive you. Gareth wept when he read them. Not from grief. From relief. From the burden of guilt finally, completely lifting. His son, aware and conscious in the between space, held no blame. Understood the impossible position command had created. Forgave decisions made in war when all options were terrible. The communications remained limited. Brief messages exchanged across dimensional barriers. But they were enough. Enough for Gareth to share news of our life. Enough for Aiden to express pride in his father's recovery. Enough for both of them to acknowledge love that transcended death and distance. Ronan sent messages too. Brief, wry observations about eternity being surprisingly boring. Requests that we remember him as he was, not as myth. Assurances that the sacrifice had been worth it, that he could feel the stability he maintained, could sense the species thriving because he held the line. We built monuments. To Ronan and the 6 scouts lost at Crimson Vale, and everyone else who had paid price for survival. Made sure their names were remembered, their choices honored, their sacrifices never reduced to simple statistics. Gareth returned to his forge, but not to hide. He taught apprentices the craft of metalwork, consulted with the Council on Nexus phenomena when needed, built a life that balanced solitude with connection, honored the past without being imprisoned by it. I continued research, but also fieldwork, training the next generation of combat specialists, teaching them that strength was not just about fighting, it was about surviving loss and choosing to keep going. We built a home together in the mountains between the Archive and Iron Peak, close enough to civilization to remain connected, far enough for peace when the world became too loud. We did not have children, though not for lack of trying. The Nexus stabilization had restored wolf bonds, but had not solved the birth rate crisis completely. But we had each other, had purpose, had community, had love earned through surviving impossible trials together. On the 10th anniversary of the stabilization, the Council finally approved Valeria's proposal for rotating anchors, a system where volunteers could take Ronan's place for limited terms, giving him respite, ensuring no single person bore the burden forever. The first volunteer was a young wolf named Kira, 45 years old, who had lost her entire family to the unraveling's early stages and wanted her pain to serve purpose. She would serve 20 years in the between space before the next anchor took her place. The rotation meant Ronan could be released, could return to physical form for the first time in a decade, could experience touch and taste and all the simple pleasures of corporeal existence he had sacrificed. We were there when he came back, when Kira entered the between space and Ronan's form solidified from light. He looked exactly as he had the day he left, preserved outside normal time, 62 years old and weathered, and absolutely delighted to discover that eternity had not been permanent, after all. "Well," he said, his gravelly voice unchanged, "that was interesting. What did I miss?" Marcus laughed and pulled him into embrace that would have broken ribs on a lesser man. "Everything and nothing. The important parts waited for you." Ronan spent his final years as living legend, teaching tracking to recruits who hung on every word, writing his memoirs with Valeria's help, proving that sacrifice did not always mean death, that sometimes heroes got to see the world they saved. He died peacefully at 95, surrounded by people who knew his name, who honored his choice, who ensured his legacy lived beyond his years. And 15 years after the stabilization, Valeria finally succeeded, found a way to retrieve consciousness from the between space without destabilizing the Nexus. A process that was complex and dangerous and required the anchor's cooperation, but was possible. Aiden came home, not as the 18-year-old who had died, but as something evolved, changed by decades in the Nexus into form that existed between corporeal and energy, human and other. He could manifest physically for limited periods, could exist in the between space when needed, was neither fully mortal nor entirely supernatural, but something new. The reunion between father and son was private, just Gareth and Aiden, and 33 years of separation finally bridged. I gave them space, knowing some moments belonged to them alone. When Gareth emerged hours later, his eyes were red from crying, but his expression was peaceful in a way I had never seen. "He's home," was all he said, all he needed to say. Aiden became bridge between worlds, helped maintain the Nexus during anchor rotations, shared knowledge of the between space that advanced our understanding of magic, represented possibility that death was not always final, that love could survive in forms we did not expect, and he approved of me, of his father's choice in mate, of the life Gareth had built from the ashes of loss. "You're good for him," Aiden told me one evening, manifesting physical form to join us for dinner. "He's happy, really happy. I didn't think I'd ever see that." "He deserves happiness," I said simply. "So do you." Aiden smiled, an expression that held his father's features but carried something otherworldly beneath. "Thank you for not giving up on him, for pulling him back to life when he was determined to hide from it." The years continued. Gareth and I grew older together, silver replacing dark in our hair, lines deepening around our eyes, bodies beginning to slow even as the stabilization kept our wolves strong. We were 68 and 53 respectively when age finally started catching up in ways magic could not prevent. But we had lived, had loved, had built something meaningful from the ruins of loss. On a cold morning in late winter, Sitting by the fire in our mountain home, Gareth took my hand and looked at me with eyes that still held the fractured gold of a wolf who had survived too much and somehow found peace anyway. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "Never thought I deserved a second chance or a mate who saw past the broken pieces to the man underneath. Never thought I could be happy again after losing Aiden." "But you are," I said, squeezing his hand. "Happy." "I am." He smiled, the expression genuine and warm. "Because you taught me that loss doesn't have to define everything, that guilt can be forgiven, that love is worth the risk of pain. You saved me, Astrid. Not from the Nexus, from myself." I leaned against him, feeling his arm come around me, feeling the mate bond still solid and warm after all these years. We saved each other. That's what mates do. Outside, snow began to fall, gentle and quiet, covering the world in white that was cleansing rather than concealing. In the distance, we could hear young wolves training, could hear life continuing, could hear the future unfolding for a species that had come so close to extinction. Ronan's sacrifice had purchased decades of peace and growth. Victor's evil had been defeated. Aiden had come home in impossible form, and two broken people had found each other and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. It was not a perfect ending, but it was real, honest, earned through surviving impossible trials and choosing to keep going when quitting seemed easier. Gareth pulled me closer, pressed his lips to my temple, breathed me in like he still could not quite believe I was real. "I love you," he said, simple words carrying weight of years. "I love you too," I replied, meaning it with every fiber of my being. And as snow fell and fire crackled and the future waited with all its uncertainty, we sat together in the peaceful quiet of a life well lived. Two wolves who had howled alone in the darkness and found each other in the light.